and welcome to Wednesday webinar. Tonight I'm coming to you from Circular Quay in Sydney, and that's the Harbour Bridge in the background, and a huge cruise ship going out from the quay, and the Opera House we've got over the other side, and in the background there is my niece Annabelle Hartman doing cartwheels.
Sorry to interrupt, but that actually flips. That was way too basic for me.
Okay. Tonight I'd like to talk to you about McCurry's case. It goes back to 1998. It's the story of two brothers, Bradley and Brett. They did the classic development where they bought an old house on a block of land. They pulled that house down and they built 3 units. Now they bought the house in 1986 and they sold the 3 units in 1988. But in the meantime, they lived in those units for about a year. Now they went to the federal court and it was found that they built those units with the intention of resale for a profit and therefore taxed as normal business income. This meant they didn't get the main residence exemption while they were living there. They didn't get to get the 50% capital gains tax discount because it was on revenue account, and just fortunately for them it was before GST came in. Otherwise they would have copped GST on the whole selling price as well, because of course they wouldn't have used the margin scheme because they didn't think they were selling on revenue account. So let's look some of the reasons for this decision. Surprisingly, he considered that they had a very low deposit compared to the size of the whole project. Their deposit was $17,000 and the whole project was only $112,000. But that was back in 1986 and interest rates were huge then, so maybe that did make the project unviable without selling, that they couldn't hold them in relation to the rent that they'd get. They did contact a real estate agent regarding selling the units before they had actually finished them, so this probably was also working against them, that's their mindset at the time. But they never did sell them at that stage, they moved into them. Now despite the fact that they ended up selling them because their business, the family business, was not going well, and that they continued to rent the units off the new purchaser after they'd sold them, this didn't still show the judge that they'd had a change of circumstances. The judge more thought that it was a interlude in the project, not a change of purpose. So he still felt that the units were being held for resale at a profit. The bank documents showed that when organising the loan, they did tell the bank that they weren't sure whether they were going to sell them or rent them out. But despite this, there was never an attempt made to rent out the units. So they found against them and they had to pay full tax on the profit they made. And there's the cruise ship breaking the Henderson Harbour. This happened back in 1988 and it didn't go to court until 1998, so it's 10 years later. Now, if this was after GST had come in, there is no doubt that when they sold the units, they would not have thought to put the margin scheme in because they thought they were selling on capital account. They didn't think they were in business, so they wouldn't have put a margin scheme clause in the contract. And the ATO comes along and 10 years later the federal court decides that yes, you were in business. Well, now with GST that means you should have charged GST, and without a margin scheme clause in the contract you are going to have great difficulty using the margin scheme. Why do you want to use the margin scheme? Because the margin scheme works the GST out on just the difference between the price you paid for the property originally, but that was $32,000 in their case back when they bought the old house and land, and the selling price. So that's all that you have to pay the GST on. If you don't have a margin scheme clause, you have to go back to zero. So they've got to pay GST on that $32,000 they paid for the property. And remembering, it was back in 1988. We're talking much bigger money now. Now, if 10 years later you get caught and you have to pay the GST, yes, you can apply to have the Commissioner grant you permission to enter into the margin scheme later, but you have to have the agreement of the original purchaser. I doubt whether the original purchaser would even still continue to own the property. You'd have very little chance of finding them. So that was a huge extra cost because they thought they might get away with it, or because, sorry, putting it in your terms, you might think you might get away with it. It's better to be certain and be able to use the margin scheme. Thank you for staying till the end. Hope you've enjoyed the scenery, and I hope you'll come back next week. Good night.